When I showed up at basic training, I had no idea what I got myself into. I thought, man, maybe I've made a terrible mistake. I have this unique path, landed me here as a 4-star general when I started as an E1. People who opened a door, took a risk on me, saw something in me and let me just do my thing.
General Bratton is the Vice Chief of Space Operations, number 2 officer in the United States Space Force.
I volunteered for everything. I was a college student. We were fighting wildfires and doing counter-drug stuff in South America and going to East Germany. I raised my hand for all that stuff. Every chance to go. I always think of it as opening and closing doors. You know, the military opened more doors than I imagined possible. I took all of it. I mean, I did it all.
General Bratton, thank you so much for joining us today. For those who don't know, General Bratton is the Vice Chief of Space Operations, the number 2 officer in the United States Space Force. And as we close out this season of the Spacepower Podcast, we really wanted to end it with a big question the service raises for a young person. Is there a path for me? And there's no one better, I think, to help describe a possible path for them than General Bratton. General Bratton, again, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, Hippie, thanks. Great to see you. I am super glad to be here and to talk to you and anybody who happens to tune in.
And so the reason why you're the right person to answer the question, is there a path for me, is because you sit at the top of the service having traveled an extremely unique road. The theme said plainly, there is no one path to greatness, and you demonstrate that. In order to understand how you see the Space Force now, let's start with the young Sergeant Bratton and talk a little bit about how you started your career and how that transitioned into becoming an officer and then the unique path that you chose.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've told this story maybe a time or two, but, I started it as you know, as a young 18-year-old. I had grown up, my dad was in the Air Force, so he retired out of Luke and we were there in Phoenix, Arizona. I finished up high school and did just a semester of college. I mean, in my family, you went to college. That's what happened after high school. There was no real discussion about it. And so I went to Arizona State for a semester, and I think Arizona State and I both agreed that I was not ready for that experience. But I knew I needed to do something. You know, I needed some direction, and a little bit. I knew my report card was going to show up at the house. And my dad was going to have something to say to me, and so I wanted to kind of be ahead of the game there. I had just enough sort of 18-year-old intellect to realize that was going to be a problem. So I went and met with a recruiter and talked to him. I did want to come back to college, and so I went and talked to National Guard recruiter in Arizona and got signed up. And just as my report card showed up for that first semester, I told my dad, "Hey, I think I'm going to go join the military," and off I went to basic training. That was the start of it at all. Mainly, I was trying to avoid getting in trouble with my parents. Led me to the military.
Well, and you had your father obviously was in the military, so he provided some perspective. What was your understanding of the military? You know, just understanding growing up in a military family. What did you understand from your dad's experience, and what did you expect when you were signing up to join the military?
Yeah, I didn't, I think, I didn't think a lot about it. Quite honestly, I knew what the experience was like. My dad had been a pilot in the Air Force. He flew F-4s. And so, I understood sort of that perspective. And we had PCS around, but I was going in and as a enlisted member. I was off to basic training, different than my father's experience. I certainly wasn't going to fly jets. And so I sort of, the recruiter, Master Sergeant Sepulveda was his name. I still remember him. He sort of could have done anything with me. What helped me is I had pretty good ASVAB scores. And so, he sort of steered me to a more technical career field, radar maintenance. I was a radar maintainer. And got a little bit of a bonus. What I told him is I want the tech school that gets me out of town the longest. And so I was really looking for what's the longest school. I knew I needed some time kind of away on my own to figure it out. And so that was like a 9-month tech school at Keesler. And that's as much thought as went into it. There was a little bit, I think like a couple $1,000 enlistment bonus that enticed me to that career field too. But I like the technical nature of it. I was sort of a computer guy even back then, and that drew me to it. And then, but when I showed up at basic training, I mean, I was just like everyone else on the bus. I had no idea what I got myself into. And there were certainly days in those early weeks where I thought, man, maybe I've made a terrible mistake, but it worked out. I got through basic. It was something.
And sir, you talk about ASU. I remember I was thinking about going to ASU before I chose to go to Northern Arizona. And I remember at the time back then when we were both going into college, ASU is the number one party school in the nation.
Yeah, that may have contributed to my downfall that first semester. I'll tell you though, to ASU's credit, they gave me an opportunity to come back and try again, and I did eventually graduate from Arizona State, and had a great GPA and really pulled it out. I think that I just wasn't maturity wise. I wasn't ready for college coming right out of high school. I really did need something. And I give credit to the military. Basic training, a year at tech school. I came back, went to the junior college. I mean, I really had my act together. I just needed a little bit of discipline, a little bit of time on my own to build some confidence and maturity. And so, that's what happened. I was gone about a year between basic and tech school, and came back and went right back to school. And I had some money now because mom and dad were done paying my bills after my early struggles. And so, I paid my way through with the GI Bill and with the money, working at the guard unit, and loved it. And I really enjoyed the being a E1, E2, E3. I had a great time. We were doing early deployments. Back then, it was still East and West Germany. That's how long ago. This is the late 80s. And so, I came right out of tech school. We had an ORI. We deployed to East Germany. And I was like, man, this is the greatest thing in the world. I'm seeing the world and just already doing amazing things. It really put me on the beginning of this path that you referenced, to where I am today. Those early days were very formative for me.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that are probably watching this that would say, hey, I'm not sure what my path could look like. But if you just take the opportunity and take the step in a direction and you say, hey, if I don't know, maybe I'll let the military help me decide on what my path could be.
Yeah, I think and this has been true throughout my career. I always think of it as opening and closing doors. If you choose to go to college or choose a trade or choose the military, you're opening doors. Other doors, may be closed to you as you decide not to do things. And so the military for sure opened more doors than I imagined possible. There were so many opportunities to volunteer for things, just training and career wise. And then, especially in the Guard, that you have a lot of optionality in the Guard to volunteer stuff. And so I volunteered for everything. I was a college student. I needed money. And so, we were fighting wildfires and doing counter drug stuff in South America and going to East Germany. I mean, I raised my hand for all that stuff, every chance to go, both get the experience and also, quite honestly, just earn some cash to help pay for school. I took all of it. I mean, I did it. I did it all.
And sir, talk a little bit now about joining the Guard and then understanding that there was in fact a space mission. Because back then, the Space Force didn't exist. Air Force Space Command was in its infancy. So talk a little bit about how you learned about the space mission and then some of the missions that you did in your early career in the National Guard.
Yeah, it was, I was in an air control squadron, the 107th Air Control Squadron there in Phoenix, Arizona. I was a radar maintainer, and did about 7 years of enlisted time. I got up to be a staff sergeant, really kind of knew my craft, really wanted to make tech. And then my squadron commander pulled me aside to go and talk to me about, hey, are you interested in OTS? I had just graduated Arizona State. And so he was tracking that. And back in that day, there was no talk of space. I'd always been a space fan, followed NASA, and it was, shuttle years. It was pretty exciting times. but on the military side, it was Tactical Air Command and then Air Combat Command. And we were doing that ground radar mission, and I loved it. We used to call it sort of the Army, as close to the Army as you can be and still be in the Air Force. And I loved the sleeping in a tent and carrying the M16 and doing all the things. And so that was my enlisted time. And I had, I had some NCOs that really helped me along the path that maybe we'll talk a little about that. But once I got my commission, we had a squadron commander, Mike Colangelo was his name, Lieutenant Colonel. And the Air Force was going through lots of, what do we do with these older systems? The Guard was trying to get into the space mission. Space had kind of was growing within the Air Force. And my squadron commander actually said, hey, I think there's a future here. He foresaw, really, now, he was way ahead of his time, but he really foresaw, hey, a sensor is a sensor. And if we can put a radar on the ground, we could probably do a lot of this stuff from space. So he saw a great connection between this ground tax mission that we did and the future opportunities in space. And so they were looking for someone, my squadron was looking for someone to send to Air Force Space Command. And I was just a captain at the time. And they wanted a lieutenant colonel. And so the word was kind of percolating around the squadron, hey, they're looking for a lieutenant colonel. And we just had a few of those. So I actually walked in my commander's office and said, hey, I would like to go do this. I'm interested. I think the future's here. And I think he looked at me like, what are you talking about? And but I ended up, they sent me I went through an interview process. I ended up being the person they sent. And I went to Colorado Springs for the first time in 2000, cross-trained, I was really a comm officer, or today we'd call it cyber. And I cross-trained from a 13 or 17 to a 13. So from cyber over to space at that time as a captain, and sort of started my space career right then and there.
Yeah. And then tell us the story about how you went from Air Force Space Command and then back to the Guard. And then, and what I get messed up a little bit in the timeline was weapon school first and then the 111th Space Ops Squadron, or was the 111th first and then weapon school?
Yeah, weapon school was first. I did a couple years at Space Command, and the Guard was trying to just grow some sort of seed corn, folks with experience, and I was one of those. And there was a couple other officers there with me, just very early days. And so they wanted me to have operational experience, so I became a missile warning operator at the 11 Swiss back in the alert days, and was doing the space-based missile warning mission. Just crew commander, I went out to Vandenberg for crew commander course when it was out there, and then came back, was doing ops out at Schriever, and then that sort of led to weapons school. The Guard had not sent anyone to weapons school, and so I ended up being the first from the National Guard to go to the space track of the weapons school in 2003, and went through weapons school. And the deal was that I had to go back to A3TW, which managed sort of the weapons and tactics program, and do a little bit of payback there. And so I ended up a couple of years back in Building 1 right out of weapons school, which was both great. It was really smart for the institution, for Space Command, for the Guard. For me, it was like, maybe not the thing I wanted, because, you want to go to the squadron level and do weapons and tactics and employ weapon systems. And I went to a cubicle in Building 1. So that was less exciting. But I made it work, and I ran the weapons tactics program for a couple of years there, handled all the weapons officer management, really stood up a lot of the early WEPTAC stuff. You were involved in that. And then I was trying to find my way. I wanted to go back. So in the weapons officer community, you usually do a tier 1 assignment, which is tactical level, and then you do a tier 2 assignment, which usually is a staff job. And I wanted to go do a tier 1 assignment. So I left Space Command and went back to Arizona. At the time in the Air Force, near space was a big thing. We're really experimenting with that, above 100,000 feet, below low Earth orbit. There's lots of opportunity there, the Air Force thought, for high altitude balloons, high altitude aircraft. And so I went back to what would really be a tier 1 weapons officer job to develop conduct test activities and develop tactics in near space, which led to the balloon stuff that you referenced earlier.
And talking about balloon stuff, just like your early squadron commander had mentioned, once you put a sensor on a capability and get access to it, it becomes extremely valuable in terms of gaining information. So can you talk a little bit about the balloon squadron and its mission?
Yeah, it was exactly that. The stuff we saw in some ways China doing to us when they were flying balloons over the United States. We were experimenting that area. So ISR payloads, we did a lot of comm relay, and this is 2005 to 2007. So we're in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there's really the Air Force was working through how do we communicate in these valleys? How do we call in air support in Afghanistan? And so we did a lot of experimentation for ground to air relays, using the balloon as really just a very high altitude bent pipe relay from a handheld radio on the ground directly into the cockpit. So we're up at Nellis doing a lot of experimentation with that. Proved out the concept. We flew some more exquisite payloads on behalf of other mission partners. That was really interesting and fun stuff. And I spent about 2 years there in Arizona. It was probably quite honestly across my career, one of the most fun jobs that I ever had, because it was anything you could think of we would try and go out and do, and we spent a lot of time on the ranges just experimenting and trying out stuff. It was great.
Let's pull the thread a little bit on that process that you're describing, which is the testing, tactics, training process, where you're doing basically operational tests, developing out new tactics, bringing those tactics into training, and then making sure that capability can comply with potential threats that exist in that domain. So can you talk a little bit about how quickly you were able to do some of that testing?
Yeah, we did. The problem that was presented to us was really how does someone on the ground communicate and call in fires from a close air support asset without carrying a SATCOM radio. And so they didn't want the weight and really the batteries and all the things that come even with a lightweight SATCOM radio. They really wanted to get to a handheld radio. But generally those are short range, governed by line of sight. And when you're in a valley, it's hard to use. So that was sort of the tactical problem that we were working against. And, so we worked through it all. How long does a how-to balloon relay last, which gets into power management on the payload? How do you station keep over an area without the wind just sweeping it far away? How do you essentially, manage the altitude of the balloon to keep it to allow that station keep? We had keeping effort. We had all these sort of problems to work through in what would be what today I would call integrated tests, because they would hand build the payload, all on something that had to be. Our goal was we flew very small payloads, so 6 pounds or less. This isn't a giant NASA balloon. This like weather balloon size thing that you could hold in your hand, and so lightweight, had to be low cost, had to be expendable, and so we worked through all those things and proved it out. And they did go on. After I left the unit, they went on and did some deployment activities, more on the exquisite payload side in the ISR realm. But it was just fun every day. Small team, a lot of really high morale, a lot of opportunity for everyone to contribute and solve the problem. It was great. It was back to the using the skills I learned at weapons school and building on my operational knowledge that I got from the 11 Swiss, and then being able to lead a team. It was one of the highlights of my career for sure.
And sir, throughout your career, you really have been bringing folks together. And so how important is it to ensure that morale is good and folks understand the mission and folks know that they're contributing to a critical mission?
Yeah, I mean that's the foundation of it all. You don't get anything done, or certainly don't have as good results if you're not doing that. And that is, especially even more so as I rose in rank, and when I was leading at the '06 level or standing up STARCOM. I mean, those were pretty significant challenges that you needed to get the most out of the whole team, and everyone on the team had to contribute. And the way, in my experience, there's probably many ways to do that, but in my experience, a strong, cohesive team with a good sense of mission, lots of connection within the team, to use the core value of the Space Force, enables then people feel they don't want to let the team down, and so they work harder, they contribute more, they're less afraid to contribute because they know, the courage aspect. They know that no one's going to shout them down or make fun of them. Less about your position and more about how can you move us towards our objective. I think that is the responsibility of leaders, whether officer, enlisted, or civilian, to generate that environment where you can get the most from your team. And so I've had the opportunity, just because of the jobs I've had, to really try and learn how to do that. I wouldn't say I've perfected it. There's always room for improvement, but I've had some success there.
And so for folks who don't know, because it is historical in terms of going to Air Force Space Command and then 14th Air Force and what 14th Air Force was doing and how it turned into what we know today. Talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, when I left Arizona doing the balloon stuff, I went to Vandenberg, to the 14th Air Force staff, and I was just a brand new. In fact, I pinned on lieutenant colonel there, and I was I was still in the Guard, and so I didn't replace someone. I was the first one there in a full-time status, and so they had no idea what to do with me. And so, but we were trying to work out, there was some Guard units in Space Command now. We were trying to work out to integrate things better. Here's how you access the Guard. That was all in my job jar. But that's where, there was a great team, that I knew from the weapons officer community. General Saltzman was there at the time. I think he was 04 or 05 going to 06. Todd Brose was there, Max Lance was there. So I had some connection with the team on the ground, and they really helped me sort of land on my feet. General Shelton was the commander. He very smart, very demanding, tough boss. And I was able to deliver a couple things for him and build some confidence in the leadership team. Jay Santee was the deputy. And so, you just, anytime you show up in a new team, you want to contribute, and not stay in the, hey, here's my job, I got to stay in my lane, but it is, what does the organization need from me, and how can I help the organization achieve its goals? And I was able to do that at 14th Air Force, I think, pretty well. And I kept getting new jobs in addition to my responsibilities for the Guard. I ended up, taking a deployment. I ended up working in the vault, lead turning some very early things now, with the GSAP program. And so it was great. Yeah, just contributing to the team, trying to move the mission forward.
And is that one of the key lessons that you think you learned from being early to something before it was fully formed, is just kind of stepping out and saying, hey, how can I help solve this process?
Yeah, I think so. The 14th Air Force was, it continues to evolve. It's been, out of all the organizations, it hasn't been very static. We've continued to modify and change that. It was the early days of the JSPOC back in the day, and we're just blowing it up to be more like the Air Force AOC construct at the time, and still a long way from where it is today as the CSPOC and Delta 5 team. And so being able to contribute to that, General Burt was out there just lighting the world on fire, killing it every day. And so I was over on the staff side as much as I wanted to be on the ops side. but I was, the stuff we were doing in the vault was really some cutting edge stuff that I got to contribute to. So I think it is, you might not always be in the shiniest part of the organization, right? You might not be, then certainly the AOC was the thing that everyone paid attention to. And I wasn't over there. I was on the staff, but there was still good work to do on the staff. That's what they needed me to do. So I just, working from the trenches, getting it done, taking care of the boss.
And for those who don't know, I mean, now that's Space Force's space. 14th Air Force
That's
obviously is shut down, and Space Force's space under U.S. Space Command is doing that job of ensuring the CSPOC is still there, and all the situational awareness from all of the assets around the globe are going to one location. So you helped stand that up way back when.
Yeah, it's funny because in all these too, something I'd maybe tell folks is, hey, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. There's a fine line to walk there in putting your, I thought the Air Force core value of service before self. I still hold that, in my heart as something that I always try and do. But that doesn't mean not to look out for yourself. There is that balance you got to find. So it was at 14th. One of the officers there was up for a deployment. He had an opportunity to move to kind of one of the high vis jobs that would have helped him in his career. And so I said, hey, I'll take your deployment because I really wanted to deploy. I'm thinking right now that if Barbara watches this, she's going to be mad at me. But because I totally volunteered for the deployment to Iraq. And then I came home and said, I'm getting deployed to Iraq. But she knows I volunteered. But anyway, so I took that deployment because I wanted to gain that experience. Like I felt like that was a door that, I had an opportunity to walk through. I hadn't had that experience as a space officer, and it was important to me to go do that. Also, I was helping out, another officer who was trying to progress his career. So it was kind of a win-win situation. So I took the Iraq deployment for 7 months into Baghdad. And that became another just very formative experience for me on understanding how to integrate space into the ground war, not even the Air Force piece, but really with the Army teammates. Worked with a lot of FA-40s, the ARS teams, Ken Clock, who's in the Space Force now, that we met out there in Baghdad. And so when you talk about finding your way in the path that you walk, there's so many opportunities. And balancing that. You don't want to be self-serving. It is what's the best thing for the Space Force, best thing for the organization, for leadership. But there are ways to navigate that and also do just all the cool things that you wanted to do. And so that was a big moment at 14th Air Force when I got to go downrange and really, employ everything I had learned up to that date in the combat environment. It was pretty cool.
And so remember you would probably come forward with a quote unquote space encyclopedia, the checklist for how to integrate space into various domains. And how much different was it? How did it just provide a guideline, but not a prescriptive way to do that job? And then how are you able to iterate based on being in the environment?
Yeah, I think this is very true. The Space Force today was true when we were in the Air Force at the time. Like, we really understand integration of capabilities, even more than we realize. And I would say compared to the other services. And so when I showed up in Iraq, I mean, it was the middle of the kind of the big IED fight. Soldiers were just getting killed in horrible ways every day, and we had to figure out how to contribute to that. And I would walk into, it was, Multinational Corps Iraq, Multinational Force Iraq, these 3- and 4-star Army organizations, as just this Air Force space guy. And I would just, talk my way into the planning session as they were working on their operations, and how can I contribute, even in the smallest way, to help protect these soldiers, contribute to their mission, provide for their offensive capabilities. If I can contribute even in a small way, then that's my job. That's significant, and it matters, especially for those folks who are going outside the wire every day. And I just took that seriously, but I really understood how to walk into a room and know that I'm the only space guy in this room. No one's going to really understand what I'm talking about. So I had to learn their language and be able to put myself and contribute meaning in a meaningful way. And so it was great. It was really good.
And now, how many of those discussions that you had back then contribute to the next part of the discussion we're going to have, which is the development and establishment of a Space Force? When did you realize that there was this Space Force that was going to be created?
Yeah, in an odd way, I was probably late to the realization. I was back in Building 1 at Air Force Space Command for probably the third time as now a colonel. I'd come out of Group Command in Maryland, and was back in Colorado. And I really thought winding down my career. And I'll never forget, I walked in, General Whiting was there. He was getting ready to go to 14th Air Force, but he was sort of in probably awaiting confirmation now that I look back. And he was doing some early work with a team on what was, I think, JFCC space to GIFSIC transition. And so I just walked in his office and I'm like, hey, I have some bandwidth, sir, if there's something I can help you with, let me help you. And so through a series of events, I started helping him on some stuff. That's really where I met General Raymond, because I was briefing him on how we were going to do theater integration from JFCC space to the theaters. And then U.S. Space Command drops on the table. And so all of a sudden it was, we're going to stand up a combatant command, U.S. Space Command again, or reestablish it. And so I got pulled right onto that team, small team working for General Raymond, with, by the way, Ken Klock, who I knew who was still in the Army at the time, who I knew from Iraq. And so we're working on this small team, standing up U.S. Space Command, and we were just buried in that task. And I was a little bit oblivious to the Space Force stuff. We had started U.S. Space. There was about 6 months between U.S. Space Command decision to establish and then the subsequent decision to establish the Space Force. So we were just rowing hard on building U.S. Space Command. All of a sudden, I sort of popped my head up, and there's a parallel effort to stand up the Space Force. That General Shaw and others were leading that effort. And so I stayed in the sort of U.S. Space Command lane, and eventually went to work at U.S. Space Command and became the deputy J3 there when it established. And so I had an awareness, but I didn't, my fingerprints are not on that first year of planning for the Space Force. I wasn't paying attention or super involved in that.
And for years now, sir, we couldn't talk about space as a warfighting domain. We were told not to talk about space as a warfighting domain. And now we're starting to be able to talk about, hey, the fact is, space is not a benign environment. Space is, in fact, a warfighting domain. So what are all those things now that we can talk about? And how does that impact young Guardians that are walking into that today? Because they probably don't realize that there was a lot of heavy lifting that went on in the early days that they now are walking in and say, of course, space is a warfighting domain. That's what we understand, and that's what we're fighting for.
Yeah, I think I think I'm with you on that. Space is a warfighting domain. I think we've sort of even moved past that's not even a discussion thing anymore, like it was when you and I were coming up. I do think what it creates is, it goes back to these opportunities. There are opportunities now for Guardians to look to both new jobs that were never available to me that I think will be really cool to do for war fighting in space kind of jobs, running offensive and defensive capabilities and understanding how to do that. I think even more so though, the opportunity to learn that at the very beginning of your career, things that I learned, quite honestly, as a colonel or a 1-star at U.S. Space Command, we're teaching to second lieutenants and specialists. And so they're going to be so much better at space warfighting than I would ever be, because they'll have a career's worth of knowledge, experience to build upon, and they will take that rightfully, further than I would be able to, because I came to that so late in my career. And so when I go out to officer training, when I go to basic military training, the tech schools, those early schools, they're teaching things that I learned, not even at weapons school, but well past that. And so I think the the chance they will have to influence how we fight in space will be significant because they're going to have to figure it out. I'm sure that they will have to fight in space, and so there's both great burden and great opportunity there. But I'm excited for them because it's a new thing that they'll really get to shape how we do that.
And sort of pulling on the thread a little bit about standing up new organizations. When did you find out you were going to be leading STARCOM and helping to create a field command?
Maybe I haven't told you this story. I found out in the parking garage of Building 1. I was walking through one day as the deputy J3 as a 1-star. And so I used to, if you know Building 1, there's this tiny little like 4-car parking garage where the commanders park. And I used to cut through there because it was a shorter route from the, where the people parked where I was. And so I was walking through the one and General Raymond had just pulled in and he goes, "Hey, Gov, you got a second?" I had actually gone out of the garage and he pulled me back into the parking garage and he goes, "Hey, I may need you to be the STARCOM commander." And this, I'm like, what's a STARCOM? And that was almost a year before we established STARCOM. And so he sort of gave me a heads up and then, a month or so goes by and I'd moved on. And he called me back in. He said, "Hey, that thing we talked about, I think we're going to go ahead and do that." And then it was still probably 4 or 5 months before I moved over to the STARCOM task force at the beginning of 2019. It must have been later than that, 2021. And then we went to town, working to get STARCOM established. And there we were on a hot timeline. It was a really small team. Short timeline. We need this thing up and running before the end of the fiscal year. And so we went from 0 to a change of command ceremony in about 6 months. It was pretty exciting. Yeah.
And sir,
almost didn't make it through that period of my life. I was running pretty hard those days.
And having probably Barbara there, making sure that everything was okay at the home front probably made all the difference.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, absolutely, Barbara, all day, every day. Chief Sabias, James Sabias was the SEL, and talk about a leadership team. We really figured out how to work together as the senior enlisted advisor for the task force, and then STARCOM. He and I were in lockstep, and we just clicked in all the ways. He knew tons of stuff that I didn't know. He had some ATC background. Obviously, he was an intel professional, and that teamwork between the two of us, another highlight of my career, and we really locked it in as what a command team should look like, and I don't take credit for that. That is the team, but he helped me in every way possible, both from my physical health, mental health, and getting mission done every day, getting STARCOM established. None of that would have happened without James Sabias.
And sir, talk a little bit about why those relationships mattered more than any title or assignment. Who are the leaders that helped pick you up and pushed you forward and mentored you throughout your career?
Yeah, that's a long list of folks who have helped me and mentored me and opened doors for me. I've talked about this a couple times. Senior NCOs and really, I would say lieutenant colonels changed lives more than any general or SEL or SIMSIF or anybody because that's the frontline contact with the specialists and with the young officers. And so, my when I came out of basic all the way back in Arizona, I still remember, I don't remember people's names, but my drill instructor at basic training was Tech Sergeant Peters, Bill Worley, Cal McCune were my first crew chiefs, Steve Spear, Dennis Tooney. Those are the NCOs that really raised me up in my early years and taught me, hey, you got to work hard. There's an expectation that you deliver for the team. And you can't let your team down. They really instilled that in me as a young crew member on the maintenance side of, hey, we're going to entrust you with responsibility. We're going to train you how to do it. And then we expect you to deliver. And if you got to work long hours, that's just how we do business. And there was such a sense of pride that developed from doing things well and being recognized. I still feel to this day we were the best maintenance shop in all the maintenance shops in the squadron. And we had such a sense of pride. And then we played just as hard as we worked, and we did crazy and fun stuff together, both on and off duty. And so they really showed me the way, these senior NCOs, of how to build a team and how to hold people accountable. And it creates that situation where now the team members don't want to let the team down. And I think if, as a leader, you can create that environment where we're going to do really hard things and we expect you to be able to do really hard things, but you're not on your own. We're all going to do this together. We're all in this together, but you got to hold up your end. And there's sort of some magic that happens there when the individual members are worried about, they do not want to let the team down. And it's how you extract really a high level of performance from individuals that raises the bar for the whole team. And I see, this is where frontline leadership, they create that environment. I think squadron commanders can absolutely contribute to it, SELs, but that next level of leadership is where it happens at the crew chief, crew commander level, the material leader level, where you create the circumstances and almost the connection requirement to build a team that can deliver and be high performing. And so that was modeled for me by these NCOs. I certainly didn't realize it at the time. And then, but I've now, in hindsight, I can look back and point to all these places in my career where, lieutenant colonels have helped me, have put me on, have entrusted me more than they ever should have with responsibility. And I felt I was so nervous about letting them down that I just couldn't, that was not going to happen. And so I had to deliver. And that happened in deployments, that happened at 14th Air Force, that happened, in all the places. And then as I, matured and thought about that, I'm like, how do I create those circumstances? I think the STARCOM team was very much that. It was a small team and we were pedaling pretty hard with things that nobody thought we would be able to do. The stand up of the Space Force PME program, no one thought we'd be able to pull that off in the short time that we did. But we did it, and we created the circumstances, and then everybody rose to the occasion.
And sir, then it's no surprise why you were asked to join the Space Force and become the Vice Chief of Space Operations.
It was a big surprise to me on the Vice Chief job. But I'm glad to be here. I really, especially, sometimes it's just, you feel like you're in the right place at the right time for the skills that you have. And so this growth piece that we're about to go into, double the size of the Space Force, increased budget. And we're certainly hopeful and working with Congress to deliver that. The infrastructure build, I think, maybe is the most important thing that we're working right now. I mean, all of this is all these my group command was brand new, the STARCOM, the lessons I learned from the STARCOM team, to be able to now sort of employ that at the enterprise level for the Space Force, 10,000 more Guardians, this new ops infrastructure that we're putting in for the 40 new squadrons that we expect to stand up. I feel fortunate to be here and contribute to that.
And how important is it to have more infrastructure there in DC and be able to tell the Space Force story in such a way that folks understand how critical it is? Because an invisible front line, as it's been referred, is often misunderstood because you can't see the domain.
Yeah, I think telling the story is important, and in the DC AOR, it's within the department, within the branches of the government. Certainly, as we communicate and answer questions for the Hill, those are skills that I felt like I didn't have, and have had to learn and continue to debrief. Hey, that engagement didn't go well on the Hill. I need to do better, and realize that none of it's such a different environment than I've had. There's some things I continue to work on that I feel like I need to be better at, to do better and deliver again, I don't want to it's that sense of obligation. I can't let the Space Force down in my responsibilities. I can't let the CSO down as I support the CSO in achieving the objectives laid out by the CSO and the secretary. And so I have this sense of obligation. Like no one wants to be the weak link. I certainly don't want to be that. And I work hard every day to deliver. But beyond that, I do think there's this even bigger piece of growing the Space Force, delivering, onboarding, training, delivering all these Guardians in time to execute the new missions we're being asked to do is just so important. I'm going to work hard at it every day. Yeah.
Is there a connection? You've talked about connection throughout your career, and you were in a band way back when.
That's
and
right.
You're getting the band back together. Talk a little bit about that story.
That is a less interesting story than people think. But I was in a band all through college. We played all around Arizona State. We played the state fair. All that kind of stuff. It was a great time in my life. And then I didn't really play for years and years and years. Every once in a while, I played in the church band, that kind of stuff. But I fell off being a musician. Actually, General James, he was the J3, I was the deputy J3. He dragged me over and we started playing a little bit because he's a guitar player. And so when we were at Space Command together, he got me going again. And then John Shaw, who's a great musician, we got together with Shaw and Endicott. And so now we have this little band that every, a couple times a year we try and get together. We just played at Endicott's retirement in his living room with Jamie Teachner actually came, who wrote the Space Force song, was there with us singing and playing the piano. It was a good time. But I don't consider myself I'm a hack. I'm a garage band bass player for sure. I look at some other guys in the group that are real musicians. I just try and hang on tight to them. But it's fun. I enjoy it.
And the name of the band, sir?
Space. It changes regularly, but Space Jam is I think the current instantiation.
Copy that. And General, for those folks listening, young Guardians, who basically the theme of this conversation has been that there is not one path to success. So what would you tell to a young Sergeant Bratton, Airman Bratton, who's looking at this video wondering, hey, what is my path to success? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, if I was talking to myself, there's a couple of things I would certainly say, don't do that. But if I was talking to the team out there, look, I don't know that I am full of wisdom or have answers. I have this, what I think is a unique path that landed me here as a 4-star general when I started as an E1. Amazing opportunities, mostly given to me by other people who opened a door and let me, took a risk on me or took a chance or saw something in me and let me just do my thing. And so I credit it to less me and more the brave individuals who took a chance on me and either gave me a job or an opportunity. And fortunately I was able to deliver for them. And so that's what I would tell really the team out there is you have to trust your teammates. You have to expect the best from them and sort of hold them accountable to a high standard. I think that's important. But then, trust that they're going to do it. It's a way of saying just open doors for people, especially in your early leadership jobs. Like, don't be afraid to trust the team. And sometimes they're going to screw it up and you're going to get called on the carpet in front of the boss. Certainly that has happened to me plenty of times. But that's just part of the gig when you're in leadership and you defend your team and then you go back and you debrief it. And if you need to chew them out, you do, but you expect the best from them. In my experience, people will rise to the occasion. We shouldn't make things easy. We should make things hard. Not, maybe I didn't say that quite right. It's not making things hard. We shouldn't be afraid to do hard things.
Yeah.
Guardians will rise to the occasion if you trust them and empower them. And, this is the discussion on mission command. We just have to believe in each other, hold each other to a high standard because just like I felt, no one's going to want to let the team down. I don't want to let the Space Force down. I don't want to let my Delta, my squadron, my program office. I don't want to let my teammates down. And so you got to put the expectation on them. Certainly, as you owe them the training and education to be able to deliver. But that's really what I'd tell people. And then, if you're an individual trying to find your way in the Space Force, there is no one way. There's 100 different ways. And that's what I get excited about, how the Space Force is organizing. Is there's a lot of opportunity there. And I felt like I've had amazing opportunities. Guardians today will have way more opportunities than even I had, in places to go, things to see, hard things to do. It's pretty exciting for the force, whether you're a brand new specialist or a brand new second lieutenant coming out of OTC. The world is yours. I mean, you just got to own it. Don't be afraid to volunteer for stuff. Don't be afraid to take the harder path. And there's some difficult challenges ahead of us. We're going to have many hard things to do, but the team will get it done. I mean, I'm fully confident.
General Bratton, not letting folks down since 1985. Sir, thanks so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule. And we at SFA look forward to continuing to have these dialogues, and hopefully we get to connect again at Spacepower 26.
Hey, I'm fully expecting the invitation for the band to play at Spacepower.
Yes, sir.
So
we're working it now.
I'll look for that. Nobody wants that. I'm just kidding. Hippie, great to talk to you. Thanks for letting me spend some time with you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And we'll talk to you soon. Semper Supra.
All right. See you.
For everyone who wants to learn more about the Space Force and attend the largest gathering of Guardians in the galaxy, go to attendspacepower.org. Spacepower 26 is now live. It's the conference you want to be at if you want to connect with the U.S. Space Force, learn more about what the Space Force is doing, and understand the mission of the Space Force. Tickets will be going fast, so if you don't act quickly, you might miss out. Go to attendspacepower.org and secure your tickets today. Early bird pricing is now live. I will see you in Orlando in December. Until then, Semper Supra.